Greetings, and thank you for joining us today for our student assignment project community engagement meeting. I am Dr. Trisilla Weaver, the Chief of Access and Opportunity, and I am grateful to welcome you into the session today. Today, we will be sharing round one scenarios and answering your questions. As enrollment decline and resources are stretched, we have the responsibility to look ahead and plan in ways that support long-term sustainability and strong opportunities for our students. The Student Assignment Project, with your feedback, is designed to ensure our scholars are aligned with enrollment trends and the evolving needs of the community. Please note, no decisions have been made. The scenarios you are about to see are starting points for our conversation. Your input matters, and that's exactly why we are hosting these sessions this week. Your feedback and our feedback survey will help shape the next round of scenarios we're sharing in March. We have partnered with HPM Group for the SAP process. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Richter, and he will provide additional information. And again, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We are running a series of meetings this week to set the baseline for the first part of the discussion around the long-range facilities plan and the disposition of buildings for the future. I think that as we've been through this process, we've heard a lot this week. We've got a lot of great feedback from communities, understanding that there's still questions out there and there's still clarifications that have to be made. We're going to keep reiterating, and we can't say it enough, that this is a first part of the discussion. We had to start somewhere, and the starting somewhere is using a process that's been going on for a little over a year called the SAP process, in which a committee of 150 people around the community were put together to study data and look at the facilities things that are facing the district today. And so with that, along with a lot of data around facilities and a lot of data around demographics and programs, the SAP group committee had brought together a set of criteria that we start to use as a baseline of discussion. And so that baseline of discussion that baseline of criteria gets applied across the district. And so the first brush has to be, and I can't reiterate this enough, has to be as equal an application as we can get across the board. And so, you're going to see things and hear terms like cascading and hear things like, standard of schools. And I think some of the confusion that gets out there is that there may be some confusion that only one piece of data gets used to make a decision, and that's simply not true. There are several layers to this. Admittedly, it's not as clean a process and it's difficult to do this. And it doesn't lend any less weight to this, that this is an ongoing issue across the country and facing public K-12 school districts across the country. Declining enrollments, aging infrastructure, cost to keep investing into that, and then the cost of resource and staffing buildings, and the ability to maintain the level of program offerings and quality of teaching obviously becomes more and more challenging as we spread our resources across. And so we're going to start today, like we have every meeting, with a video that takes about 23 minutes to get through the video that sets the baseline. And when we get through the video, Scott Leopold and I will pick up just very quickly to talk about some of the key questions that we've been hearing, and then I'll turn it over to Sarita Smith and Dr. Campbell to talk about input in the question and answer period that we'll do for the rest of the call today. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope we can get to as many questions as we can, and I'll turn it back over to the presentation. Thanks.
I'm Scott Leopold, Director of Planning Services with HPM. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this online presentation. This resource is designed to clearly explain the initial facility scenarios for the DeKalb County School District and to support ongoing discussion across our community. Nothing you see here is final. These scenarios are starting points, intentionally drafted at a high level so that we can gather meaningful feedback from families, staff, and community members. The goal is simple: to create a stronger, more equitable, and more efficient school district where every student, regardless of where they live, has access to well-resourced learning environments. This presentation provides an overview of the initial facility scenarios The first round of ideas meant to spark conversation. These scenarios serve as a framework to gather your thoughts, questions, and suggestions. Before we discuss buildings or grade configurations, it's important to center the work on why we are doing this. The district was built to serve 110,000 students, but now serves around 92,000. The enrollment is projected to decline further. The Student Assignment Project, or SAP, ensures that the resources follow the students, not the empty seats. This chart tracks historical enrollment against capacity over time. Over the past decade, enrollment has declined while the facility capacity remains high, leaving more than 20,000 empty seats. There are 5 core reasons driving this work: declining enrollment, buildings needing repair, capacity imbalance, transportation inefficiencies, and the need to consolidate resources. To better understand the 5 reasons why, consider that if we better manage the declining student enrollment and have fewer underutilized schools, then we can improve support for the diverse learner needs through more intentional differentiation and targeted interventions. If we have less school buildings that need significant repair and improvement, then we can actualize cost avoidance to reinvest in fewer buildings with greater impact. If we balance the capacity at our schools, then we can enhance access to instructional and student support resources, as balanced capacity allows schools to more effectively utilize spaces, staff, and materials. If we have more efficient transportation routes, then we can reduce student commute times with schools located closer to home, leading to less time on buses and more time for learning, rest, and family engagement. If we have fewer buildings to operate overall, then we can consolidate resources, invest in educators and specialized staff, expand academic, social, emotional, and behavioral supports for students. Many may wonder why we are focusing specifically on buildings right now and not considering boundaries or programs. At this point in the plan, facilities serve as the non-negotiable. We need to determine which facilities align best with our demographics, and in the fall of 2026, once the building portfolio is determined, we will overlay boundaries and programs. It is critical to separate buildings from the programs because we do not want programs or boundaries to dictate which buildings are most strategic to the district. This is an illustration of building efficiency. When an elementary school is enrolled below 450 students, the dollars from the state fund for a principal and a half nurse, and any other positions beyond teachers will need to be funded with local dollars. This leads to resources being spread thin when there are many low-enrolled campuses. As you can see, as the enrollment starts to increase over 450, you start to get a higher share of state funding. The big takeaway from this concept is that services at smaller schools are subsidized by larger schools. This local funding is to keep the same level of service at schools with low enrollment is not sustainable. Another way to illustrate the challenges that we are having is this decision triangle. If a district wants low operating costs with robust program offerings, it is difficult to have small school sizes. If a district wants small school sizes and low operating costs, it is difficult to offer robust programming. If a district wants robust program offerings with small schools, it is difficult to have low operating costs. We are not asking you as a community to pick which are the most important, but we want you to understand the trade-offs. Every district's triangle is unique and based on their community. Now, to tie all of this together, without action, declining enrollment will stretch resources too thin across too many facilities. Now we will discuss the process that was followed to get where we are and how different stakeholder groups have and will engage. The SAP committee is composed of 150 members that have advised this effort throughout the process. They are charged with advising on reimagining DCSD's buildings, boundaries, and programs. The SAP committee is not the final decision maker. This group helped to establish guiding principles that serve as a benchmark throughout the process. Beginning in the fall of 2025, the committee transitioned to providing guidance to the district operations team and the HPM consulting team in order to develop and refine scenarios. The scenarios that you will see in this presentation were developed by district staff and consultants, influenced by the guiding principles and other feedback from the SAP committee. The Board of Education is responsible for final decisions, not the SAP committee. Now for a little more information on operations and HPM. Again, all the input from the SAP committee was shared with operations and the HPM consulting group to develop scenarios. HPM will lead the scenario and community engagement phase between January and May of this year. HPM will ensure that feedback from all stakeholders is incorporated into future iterations of scenarios. The graphic details the flow of community feedback and how it is incorporated into the process. This is planning in public. It may look like this is an incomplete scenario, and that is intentional. We want to collect feedback along the way to ensure that this plan incorporates community feedback. We have shared the initial scenario publicly and are in the process of collecting feedback that will inform the next iteration of the scenarios. As we move forward in this process, the scenarios will become more detailed and refined. To collect feedback, there is an online survey available in 13 languages. HL Strategy, an independent third party, will compile the feedback from the survey and provide reports to DCSD, HPM, and that feedback will then be shared with stakeholders. We will also use the survey to identify any groups that have not engaged in the process so that we can perform some additional targeted outreach in the form of focus groups. The board receives updates monthly. Final recommendations, including boundaries and programs, are expected in the late fall of 2026. This section explains how these initial scenarios were designed. Again, this is what planning in public looks like. This is the first round of scenarios intended to start conversations and gather feedback. Nothing has been decided, and these are not final plans. We need your feedback to better refine what comes next. The community voice is just as important as the data. In order to develop scenarios, we considered factors like the proximity of facility locations to student centers, the proximity of facilities to other facilities, building adequacy, which includes capacity. For example, there are 24 elementary schools that are below 600 student capacity. We also considered cascading use to use our best buildings with the most capacity, and also recent investment in facilities. Another important consideration is that this is a highly interconnected plan. Making changes to one facility may impact several others and cause us to reevaluate the entire scenario. Another major factor in this scenario is the concept of cascading use. What this means is that we want to preserve our middle and high school facilities as strategic assets. This is because they are our largest and most efficient facilities from an operations standpoint, but they are also more expensive than elementaries and take much longer to construct. So by converting high schools down to middle schools and middle schools down to elementary schools, we keep those larger and more efficient buildings in their portfolio. But this does shift the impact of consolidation down to the elementary level. Another benefit to this concept is that if demographics do shift in the future, and there are needs for additional high schools in some areas of the district, we will have the facilities that can be converted back. As we get into the initial scenario, remember that this is the initial scenario and that your feedback will inform and refine future iterations. One last thing before we get into the scenario slides is I want to provide some details on possible facility reuse plans. The last thing anybody wants is abandoned buildings. For facilities that are ultimately recommended to close, after all iterations and feedback, there will be a dedicated process to determine what happens to them. Possible actions may include, but are not limited to, repurpose for non-instructional use, like office space, use for expanded early childhood programs, work with other public entities for alternative use, or land bank for future uses of the site, demolishing the building and planting grass. This map shows the facility actions for this scenario. Please feel free to pause this video or look at the slides on the resources page to get a better look. Shown in green are 3 high schools proposed to convert to middle schools: Cedar Grove, Lithonia, and Towers. Shown in orange are 5 middle schools proposed to convert to elementary schools: Bethune, Champion Theme, Lithonia, McNair, and Miller Grove. Shown as red X's are the potential closures or repurposed buildings. Shown as blue circles are potential capacity expansion projects. Buildings in gray have no changes in school use. It should be noted that closures or repurposes in areas near potential capacity projects are dependent on those expansion projects. These facilities are well utilized, but they are just too small. The capacity expansion projects get the average size of facilities in these areas from under 500 to over 750. It should be noted that in future iterations, there will be a capital improvement plan overlaid on the entire portfolio. This will include renovation, modernizations, and other facility improvements in all parts of the district. Lastly, this is a long-term plan that would take at least 6 to 8 years to fully implement, and there are no changes for the 26-27 school year. This slide details each facility along with the capacity and utilization metrics. Schools highlighted in yellow are cascading use and changing grade configuration. Schools in blue require capacity expansions. The big takeaway is that this plan reduces nearly 15,000 of the over 20,000 empty seats. And the projected utilization in the year 2030 goes up to 88% from 76%. This allows for more resources to be redirected into the classrooms. The next few slides show how we came to this initial scenario. Because high schools are our largest and most efficient facilities, we started there. Forecasted enrollment shows that in the year 2030, we will have 4 high schools worth of excess seats. So we started with a scenario that reduces 3. Towers High School has the lowest building adequacy and is in close proximity to the larger and more adequate Columbia High School. Cedar Grove High School has low building adequacy and is in close proximity to the larger and more adequate McNair High School. Lithonia High School is smaller and in very close proximity to the larger and newer Miller Grove High School. Moving on to middle schools. In 2030, we are forecasted to have 5 middle schools worth of excess seats. Then we also have the 3 high schools we have cascaded down. That brings our total to 8. This scenario converts 5 middle schools to elementary schools and closes 1. Because of cascading use, McNair Middle School, Bethune Middle School, Miller Grove Middle School, and Lithonia Middle School all convert to elementaries. Champion Theme Middle School converts to an elementary because it has the lowest building adequacy of all middle schools. The program will move to a new location. Cedar Grove Middle School closes due to cascading use and excess elementary capacity in the area. Moving on to elementaries, which is where the vast majority of the closures or reuses occur. By the year 2030, we are forecasted to have 20 elementary schools worth of excess seats. And converting 5 middle schools gives us an additional 10 elementary schools of excess seats. This scenario closes or repurposes 26 elementary schools. Elementaries in areas of underutilization close due to capacity in the area along with cascading use. Elementaries that are appropriately placed and well utilized have proposed facility additions. Elementaries that have low building adequacy and are in close proximity to schools with excess capacity or planned additions are proposed to close. This diagram shows the cascading use in a visual way. Please feel free to pause to get a better look. This identifies high schools converted to middle schools, and then middle schools converted to elementary schools. That you may not see your facility listed on any of the maps or slides in this initial scenario. Please know that they're being addressed through separate actions based on building and programmatic needs. Adequate placement for all students and programs will be incorporated into future iterations. The following slides explore some different grade configurations that may be incorporated into future iterations. These different configurations can be adapted with the same 27 closures. They may provide benefits to different parts of the district, but they do come with trade-offs. This is the traditional pre-K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12 configuration. This is what the district currently runs in most of its facilities. Benefits include access to robust programming when well enrolled, allows for 3 tiers of transportation with a reduced need for buses and drivers, environments that are aligned with students' developmental needs, and it is familiar. Challenges are that when enrollment is low, resources can be spread thin, multiple transitions for students, and less grades per building means that parents can have more pickups and drop-offs with multiple children. The middle school and high school concept will also work with the PK3, 4, 5, which we'll talk about on a future slide. PK through 8 model. It should be noted that we need to have a total of enrollment of around 900 students in order for this model to be operationally efficient. Benefits include more access to advanced curriculum. Having more students in larger building is more efficient. There's only one transition, K through 12. More grades in the building means less pickups and drop-offs for families with multiple children. Having students in the same building for 9 years can build lasting relationships. Challenges include limited programming at middle grades due to smaller cohorts. Extracurriculars may also look different. There may be additional staffing certification needs. Facility modifications may be needed, and moving to a 2-tier transportation system may require more buses and drivers. Some students may struggle with the 8th to 9th grade transition, and challenges around having a wide range of developmental stages of students. Here is the 6 through 12 model. Benefits include middle school students can have more access to advanced coursework. More students in a larger building is more efficient. There's only one transition, K through 12. More grades in the building means less pickups and drop-offs for families with multiple children. It allows for the preservation of all high school communities. It also allows students to build lasting relationships. Challenges include smaller cohorts, resulting in lower numbers for enhanced programming. Due to the small cohorts, extracurriculars will look different. There may also be additional staffing considerations. Moving to a 2-tier transportation system may require more buses and drivers. And there's challenges around a wide range of developmental stages of the students. I think that the big takeaway with this one is it allows all the high schools to stay high schools. But if programming is a struggle due to low enrollment now, it still would be under this model. This last model is the PK3, 4, 5. This allows for a focus on early literacy. Other benefits include allowing buildings with lower enrollment to operate more efficiently. It also works well where buildings are in close proximity so that students can be on the same bus route. And having larger cohorts has more opportunity to address differentiated learning needs. Challenges include adding a transition, and that can be additionally disruptive. Existing facilities may need some modifications, and there is also a higher likelihood that siblings would be in multiple buildings. There's also shorter time for staff to form relationships with families and students. To close out the grade band discussion, here are some examples of how they could work specifically for DCSD. For Cross Keys, once Sequoia opens, Cross Keys High School will not have a natural middle school. If that whole cluster transitions to PK through 8, there would be no need for a middle school. Alternative to converting high schools to middle schools. Converting a high school with excess capacity to a 6 through 12 campus can better use those buildings and keep more high school clusters. As an example, instead of Cedar Grove High School converting to a middle school that feeds into McNair, both Cedar Grove and McNair High Schools could convert to 612 campuses. The middle schools in these areas would then still cascade into elementary schools as proposed. The PK3, 4, 5, again, also called the primary and intermediate elementary schools. In the Dunwoody cluster, this used to occur. Also, currently, the city schools of Decatur run a similar configuration, PK through 2 and 3, 5. Feedback is what this process is all about. We need your feedback to make things better and more tailored to the community needs. Think district-wide and long-term. This plan considers all DCSD students and will shape the district for decades. Please be specific about the schools, areas, and concerns you're addressing. Provide respectful and actionable feedback. Personal attacks or threats will not be tolerated and will be removed. Feedback should be given through the online survey so that it can directly inform the next phase. Multiple ways to engage. The survey will be checked in real time. Common themes will be used to develop an FAQ, and additional feedback options will be offered to ensure broad access and participation. I will talk a little bit about the timeline. Again, this process kicked off in the fall with the SAP committee, and we are in the scenario development and feedback phase now. We will have additional scenarios informed by your feedback in the early spring. We will continue to refine over the summer with consideration and board action in the fall. Here is the overall schedule for the feedback sessions, both in person and virtual. The February meetings are for this initial scenario, and the March sessions will be for the next iteration based on your feedback. All feedback will be considered regardless of volume or frequency, and it should be directed towards the survey. We will be providing an FAQ before the feedback sessions, and it will be added to throughout the process. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation.
So I think that when you see that, and that, first of all, thank you for your patience through that. I know it takes a while to get through that video, but it gets you from where we have been to where we're going. I do think there's a couple things out there that we've seen as common themes, and I think when Sarita gets on, we're going to be talking about these questions that you're posting. But a couple of things that I want to address that I know that are frequent questions we've heard. I think one is sits around things like performance, and has performance been considered? Certainly we understand concerns when there could be a school that is currently a high performing school that might not be going to a school that might not be performing as well. First and foremost, the goal of the district is every school's a high performing school. But one of the reasons, and some of the reasons that we don't, that although we acknowledge that fact, that we don't use it as a primary criteria, is that the performance is measured in a lot of different ways, not just the grade of a school or the state rating of a school. And trying to measure performance when we know that there are schools out there that are outperforming in gains, that might not be scoring as well as the overall score, but might be gaining faster. And so how do you factor that in? How do you factor in literally the hundreds of outside influences that impact performance at schools? And then the services that schools have to perform in order to get the achievement they need. Also, how can we measure when admittedly the district has to look at equity of program delivery and the number of programs and types of programs in schools? And so there's a lot of factors that go into performance that make it difficult to kind of gauge what performance really means. Although, again, we acknowledge the fact that performance is a part of the concern that communities have when they're going into that. And again, we welcome that feedback because we want to hear the importance of that from the community, and again, helping us shape some of the decisions. The second thing is around clarifying class size versus school size. I want to make it very clear that class size is an operational issue. It's not a facilities issue. Capacity is based on the policy of the school board and the state minimums that allow for a certain amount of students in a building or in a classroom. And so capacity has figured that. So buildings that have 1,500 in them can have just the same class size as a building with 500 in them. Again, it's an operational issue when it comes to being able to staff. what we have seen, again, in a lot of school districts out there, is that oftentimes the really small enrolled schools, and that may not apply to you, but to some people on the call today, but the really small schools oftentimes have a harder time controlling class size because you may go 1, 2, or 3 over the allotted class size, but it doesn't afford you the ability to bring in another full-time equivalent teacher. And so you could press those class sizes by only having 1 or 2 teachers per grade level in a school building. And so we do recognize that we want to maintain a class size that is acceptable to the community, but is also something that fits within the district budget. And so, but want to make it clear that there is no correlation to the school size versus school size, or class size versus school size, if capacity is figured right and if they're staffed right. So class sizes becomes an operational issue. And Scott, I think you might have 1 or 2 other clarifications, and we'll get right to questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, the only other thing that I did want to add, and I'm seeing a lot of questions about this, about utilization and other factors that were considered in this initial set of scenarios. We tended to focus more on building adequacy, and that's a measure of how well the building can address the program. And that considers things like site size and capacity. There are some schools that people are confused that they are on the list because they're well utilized. And I'll tell you that they are on the list because they are just too small. And in some cases, their sites may not be expanded. And in some cases, their sites are expandable, but there are other campuses nearby that are better positioned. And so, again, there's not a hard and fast data rule that identifies why a facility may or may not be on a list. You've got to consider a lot of different factors. And I would urge you to kind of look at the placement of facilities, relative to other facilities. And that is a metric that is available on our dashboard for you to look at. But it's not a hard and fast utilization rule that we use to determine this initial list. And again, we can make adjustments in the next iteration based on your feedback. So Sarita?
Yes, thank you, Scott. All right, so you guys cleared up a few commonly asked questions. Scott, I'm going to volley back to you on cascading. And then I also want to clarify, because I have seen some questions from some of our SAP members as well about this. So I'll let Scott clarify what cascading, or why we're using cascading in this the current scenario that you guys saw. That did not technically come from SAP. That was not something SAP asked HPM necessarily to do. The guidance from SAP around buildings was to apply an equal process across the district, because there are clear inequities that we have across the district as it relates to buildings, for that process to be data informed and for, to the best extent possible, to offer safe and secure locations for student learning. So Scott, tell us how cascading became a part of this scenario.
Sure. So when we talk about cascading use, what we're really talking about is that we may have areas in the district where we have excess capacity at the middle school and high school levels. I'm just going to be upfront. It's more prevalent in the southern portion of the district than it is in the northern portion of the district, and so you may not see cascading up north because there isn't as much excess capacity. But in those areas where we do have excess middle school and high school capacity, we wanted to preserve those larger, more expensive strategic assets. It takes much longer and it's much more expensive to construct a middle school or a high school than it does an elementary. And they wanted to be able to preserve those buildings and sites for the time, if and when the demographics do turn around, and we may need to return to having larger high school facilities on those sites. And so by keeping those in the portfolio, we're kind of preserving those strategically for the future if needed, but it also allows us to provide a better environment. A high school can make a better, more adequate middle school environment than an existing middle school may be. And a middle school can make a more adequate elementary school than an existing elementary school may be. It also allows us to kind of shift that burden of consolidation down to that elementary level. Then that may be something that you may like, or you may not like. You may rather just see middle schools and high schools, closed rather than converted, and that's fine. That's the kind of feedback that we're looking for. We just kind of chose that strategic direction in this first iteration across the board to try to preserve those strategic assets and keep them in the system.
Thank you. And I'll also point out there's a lot of specific school-based questions, but just to keep it at a high level for this meeting, this week was really about getting as many people to baseline as possible and to get as many community members to understand the process on how we got to this kind of first iteration. So I'm not going to maybe address super specific schools, but definitely some of our large strokes. And then you guys will have some cluster level specific opportunities, especially with round 2, where we will be coming out and doing a little bit more of a SAP workshop-like session where you will get to have some QR codes for data and maps and a little more of a hands-on approach where we'll be addressing some specifics. Because again, we have all the way until the end of May for this process. So we have time to vet, process, and iterate. All right, so I also see a lot about, and Scott, I'll have you jump on about this one, large or buildings that have large capacities already, but still somehow are on the closure list. So can we help families understand why they may be in a school that is already full and or over capacity and how that ended up on a closure list?
Sure. So we do have cases where we may have facilities that, may have capacities that are larger than those kind of thresholds that we put out there, that 600 for an elementary, 1,100 for a middle school, and 1,200 or 1,600 for a high school. There are cases where there is just not enough students in that area. And so those are cases where we'll be looking to try to find a better alternative use for those facilities, to keep them in the system. But again, it's not a hard and fast that, if your utilization is above X, if your capacity is above Y, you are exempt from consideration. We really have to, at this point in the process, not take anything off the table.
Thank you. Tracy, I'm going to have you answer this question. Again, this is kind of, again, our broader strokes. The reality of, can you talk a little bit more about the reality and timeline around consolidations versus expansion projects? I see a lot of questions on how could we possibly talk about closing a school here if there's nowhere for them to go yet? And how do we account for financially making that feasible versus if there's a consolidation and how, what the timeline implications are for both of those actions?
Yeah, that's another great question on clarification about, how kind of the process is going to overlap. This process is also intended to inform the eSPLOS program and investment into facilities. One of the reasons you see kind of what might be perceived as a long timeline in this 6 to 8 years is that there are certain areas of the city that this plan cannot impact for many years. And the reason for that is that the dollars would have to be invested into facilities. So for example, if you might be in an area that needs an expansion, we're going to have to look at the availability of eSPLOS dollars to see when an expansion of a building can even happen. And then, so you have to go through a design and construction period, and then, that could take a couple of years to do. And then we can start to make a move. And so, which would again take 1 or 2 more years to make sure the community is informed, that logistics are in place, that staffing is in place to make that happen. And so we have to have an investment also into buildings before students can move. Now, this also applies to buildings that may not just need expansion. And so other parts of the district where maybe expansion is not needed, but renovation to a facility may be needed in order to move students into. And so the intent from a building standpoint, from a facility standpoint, is first and foremost, and I don't know if this will help or not, but first and foremost is that the original intent of any move is to move all students together. The intent isn't to break up, schools. And one of the reasons for the cascading effect would be in an effort to try to keep entire schools together as they move. And that will be the intent on every building we look at. And that's our first goal. We also know that we're going to have to go through a boundary process to make sure we're realigned and everything's like that. And the next kind of stage when we had determined the building portfolio is to walk into that boundary process. But the 6 to 8 year process is intentional because we want to make sure that no student walks into a building that's not the appropriate building for them to walk into. And I think one thing on appropriateness is that what I want to get to is that let's not confuse kind of capacity of a building to utilization of a facility. The district standard as established in 2015 that was passed on to this process was the standard for new schools for elementary schools is 800, the standard for middle schools is 1200, and the standard for high schools is 1600. And so we're actually shifted those a little bit because we think that at least a school should be able to be built to a capacity of 600 students. And there are simply some sites that we understand are completely overutilized and have a full enrollment and even exceeding that enrollment. But the building, we can't get to the minimum standard, the operational standard, that is an equal application across the district for a first blush. We weren't going to make a decision on one building in one part of the district to another part of the district that wasn't consistent, because that's the first brush that we had to make at it. Now, as we go deeper into the community engagement process, as we look more specifically at your area, we will try to work, and the goal is to work through solutions to ensure everything I just said. Move whole cohorts together. How do we find a facility that can hold the right amount of students so either we're not operating in half-empty schools or schools that have so many portables on the site that we don't operate it in the manner a school should be operated. We don't think portables are a long-term solution for students, and we also don't think portables are a long-term solution to attract good teachers into good work environments. And so we want to make sure that we build those schools. And so those investments will have to be made. And working with the community, we'll be able to see where our investments are best spent based on those needs.
Thank you, Tracy. All right, so there's a lot of questions in the chat, and I'll try to kind of condense these as consolidate them as much as possible. And I'll probably have you, Scott, jump in with Tracy on this one, which is about it's challenging for families to give input on a possible building closure or expansion part and not know where their kid's going. So if I agree that maybe this school may not be the best site, but I want my kids to stay, if you will, with their cohort, and I want to know where they're going, like how families are having challenges on giving feedback on this portion without seeing the full scope of the process. How do we reply to that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things there. I think, the first thing is that you leave it first at the highest level because, and if you can understand from this side of the seat, and that's what I'm going to ask for a little bit of understanding from the first stage of planning, is that we intentionally want to make this a dialogue. We want to intentionally make it a conversation where the communities are helping us shape some of that data to help make those decisions. If we came out and said, well, this school is moving to this school and we're going to do this, then it doesn't leave any sort of even perceptual rule or real rule that there is flexibility in the plan. We would be accused of, well, you already came up with a plan. And so we've got to find a balance there. And the balance is that understanding that if we have those challenges, and we do in different parts of the district that are trying to get to the right solution, that trying to help us with ideas around, like if for instance you're at a site that doesn't have a building that could get to the capacity and you have enough enrollment to sustain a school, help us with solutions. Help us with, are there alternative ideas about how we can house all your students, or are there places that we can go in your community that can help us shape that more? That's the kind of feedback we need. Understanding that the first round is going to be very critical of us in this. Understanding we're going to get that critique, but also have to understand that if I don't apply on this first brush the same application of data where every school we're trying to get to this number for a capacity number and an enrollment number, if I don't apply that across the district, then all the meetings I have to walk into, I have to explain why you did that to them and not us, or why are you doing that to us and not them. And so the first application as we go across this, and I'm going to keep iterating this because as we shape this more to each community, and that's how these processes work, is you use the data as a first application for discussion. And then as you dig deeper into each community and you see the needs more specifically and the solutions more specifically, then we can make different iterations. Every plan is like this, admittedly kind of messy to start, but we need the input. And even if And again, part of what Sarita talked about earlier, that second phase of meetings that we go out to are more workshop meetings with the communities to maybe help us. Maybe we can come up with some ideas that you can bounce back off of again. And so that's our goal here.
Thank you. Thank you. So there's a lot of questions about like that next phase or the iteration process and how many iterations there will be. I saw something about, we keep saying scenarios plural, but this is just one scenario. So I'm going to have just Tracy talk through us, like what does iteration look like in real time? And I know we have some dates in March that we've already published. Based on this week, we're already, looking to iterate that a little bit, just again, so we can have some more deeper conversations. So if you could just give kind of broad strokes on like kind of what planning in public really does look like and go a little deeper on that. And I just want to reiterate and promise, like, we are coming to you guys. We are coming specifically in your areas. We are aware that we may not be able to do a broad stroke across everyone at the end of this, but we had to Tracy's point, kind of start there and then work our way backwards.
Yeah, and I think again, this scenario and my apologies for scenarios versus scenario. The first iteration of discussion points for each of these buildings is what we were intended to get to. And so iterations can look like things like in capacity expansion. I think I got this question in the SAP meeting. Capacity expansion mean that a building that that could use an expansion but probably needs replaced, can that be a definition of expansion? Absolutely. Again, informing the eSPLOS to see how the eSPLOS program can accommodate new construction instead of just wings or just some renovations and wings. And that can help us. That would be an iteration of something that we could look at instead of just, so we may say this building could use an addition of this many seats. It would cost this much, or we could look at a longer term replacement for that building at the right standard that we want it for. And so that's an iteration that we can go through. We can also go through an iteration. I know that a lot of conversation. Can we have some iterations that include, as we move through this, what do different types of programs look like in buildings, and can those attract students, and can we balance enrollment better like that? And I think we utilize some of that discussion to come up with the next scenario. And again, as we go into that next round of scenarios, we get more specific to the neighborhood, and understand that, we have these noon meetings and we have night meetings, but we work through the day in response to what we're hearing feedback daily. And so it's not just, sitting for a week and then we're going to get back to it. We are actively working every day with already feedback that we're getting from different areas of the district to ensure that we have a next round that is responding to the community ask out there. And once again, I want to be clear, and I know sometimes that there's long answers to this, but there are two sides to this, is that you have data and then you have the community input on it. And the uniqueness of every district working through a process like this is how the data and the community input merge together. And you'll hear me say it tonight if you attend tonight, and you've heard me say it in meetings before, that if we rely too much on the data, we could ignore that community ask. If we just face the community ask, we could ignore the data. Both have to work together. We can't ignore both. We have to work to the standards that the district wants to get to for educational facilities. We also want to get to making sure that we preserve legacy as much as we can, and as best we can, move total cohorts together. And that takes a lot of work with the community. And so I'm asking that work with us, because that's what we're there for. If we didn't want to work with you, we would do this in a back room somewhere and just come out with an idea. That's not our intent. Our intent is to go out in front of you, do this in front, take the questions, even take the criticisms that we're going to take, and then come together to see if we can come to the right solutions for each community in the district.
Thank you. And I think there was some, like, timeline wise. So again, like as Tracy said, we're working through iterations now. So by March, you'll see something different, and it probably will be scenarios and not a scenario. So you will see those variations in March, which is why we think it's important to have the cluster kind of or community level kind of meetings, so we can get a little more granular as to what that may mean for your area or some ideas around that. This goes through, so our hope is by May, end of May, early June, that we have some solid foundations on which buildings we are using for educational resources. And then we will work throughout the summer to start applying things like capital campaigns or capital building plans and the boundaries and programs, and then essentially do this all over again for several more months. So there will be plenty of time and plenty of revisions and iterations that go into this. So thank you for those questions, especially about round 2 and things of that nature. All right, so this question, I'll take this question. It's a little bit, or I'll tag team with Scott about how school choice and families that want choice was implemented into this process. So Scott, if you could talk a little bit about live-in versus attending school enrollment data, and which one we used around like these maps and the current scenario. And I will start a little bit with, we are very clear and aware that school choice is in high demand in this district across the board. I think the reality is we are suffering from some human capital in order to offer more of that throughout the district as widely as it is desired. And so part of this process is how do we consolidate some in some areas so we can offer more, because if we have fewer tiny school choice programs throughout the district and have hopefully some that are in fewer spaces, we could offer more capacity in those buildings for school choice. And again, it's more of an educator resource as well as a building resource. There's some spaces we just don't have large building that we can offer those programs. So we're looking at all of that in conjunction with this, but I'll let Scott talk about what these numbers and the maps are based off of live-in versus attending.
Sure, thank you, Sarita. We really started with kind of the resident attendee population, so the students that are kind of living in and attending the regular cluster schools. We absolutely considered where those choice programs are and where those students are coming from. I think that it's important to consider is that I'm going to use the term magnet. Some of these programs are more or less magnetic than others. And that was definitely something that we kind of considered as we went through this. I would definitely look towards, as you look towards the next iteration of this, you're going to start to see some more of these, choice campuses involved in these scenarios. They weren't really in here in this iteration because we really wanted to focus on kind of just our base cluster facilities. As we start to get some more clarity on which facilities may be available as we move into the next iteration, you might start to see some proposals where you see some of those schools moving into better facilities that would be available. And so again, it's something that we're absolutely aware of and considering. We just wanted to make sure that we kind of started with that baseline of those cluster schools with this iteration, and we'll get into those choice schools as we move forward in the process.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna ask Milton. I'm gonna package this a little bit, and maybe even Kennedy to hop on for this question. Maybe who's my schools person? Sorry, I saw your name, but I lost it. Is it Beth Kyle? Just to talk through this one with me. So there's a few questions just about like transition, and if for whatever reason, whatever happens in this district, how one, do we support the current families and educators in a transition process? And Milton, I'll have you talk a little bit about what that means on the allotment end, but also Mr. Kennedy to talk a little bit about what that means on supporting on the staff. And we just had an experience with this this last year, so I think we have something fresh in our mind that we can turn to. And what does that mean about things like extracurriculars and support in those schools as a transition happens? What does that look like?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start off by because mine is fairly simple. When it comes to the students, we need to understand that it is the students that generate funding for our district. And so wherever the students go, the funding follows the students. So even if there is a merger of the schools and there's an increase of student enrollment at a particular school, it is just, it's okay to assume that wherever the students go, that the funding is also going to go there, thus equipping that particular facility with the additional resources necessary to educate those students.
And do I have, I believe someone from schools was on here. I don't know. Okay, Mr. Kennedy, go ahead and talk about the transition for our staff and if we transition schools or buildings.
Yes, greetings. So when it comes to the staffing at this time, the district is in the process of developing a comprehensive and equitable displacement and reassignment framework. Once that is finalized, the process will be communicated clearly and directly to the affected staff and the opportunities for support and guidance when it comes to transitioning.
Thank you. And I will say, based on my first experience with that here, you know, it's going to be important that we don't do too many of these at once, whatever the number ends up being, because it's a lot of movement, which we know, which is why, and I think we said it on a few slides, this is like a 6 to 8 year plan. It is directly connected to eSPLOS as well. So we cannot do all of this at once. That's just, it's not even plausible to do all at once, especially the ones that take eSPLOS funding, because that has to get approved. There's an entire process for that. Some of this is much further down the line than others, but I thought it was important that we show a full picture and not surprise people at a later date and just say like, hey, by the way, your school is also on here 5 years later. So we wanted to make sure that people saw, I think, the full picture, and then obviously chunk that out over the time span that we have allotted. So thank you guys for that. All right, Tracy, can you talk a little bit about HPM's role both with this process and eSPLOS? I think people are confused on like what HPM was hired for. So there's clearly an eSPLOS part, but how did you guys get kind of connected to the SAP process?
Yeah, when the district released an RFP for services that were for program management, but to manage the existing eSPLOS program. And part of that ask in the RFP was to include expertise on planning services, you know, and which is a kind of a rarity, but understanding that a program under implementation impacts planning and planning impacts programming. And so the district was seeking a firm that had the expertise in both. And we are a firm that has, my career has been in planning, not program management. But it is a separate team that manages the program that then does planning. However, we collaborate on things like when we're doing planning or when they finish projects, they are able to update us to keep data current. And I think that is something that instead of coming around every 5 years when the eSPLOS program comes up, to then kind of re-engage data and to go through all the data once again, the idea was to try to keep data current as you go through a plan and process like this. And so, you know, HPM is positioned to do that because of, you know, my 25 years of planning experience, and also working with, you know, several different program managers over the course of my career, that allows me to work with that program management team and the team to work with the program management team to inform them on eSPLOS projects. And so I know that it's not something that's seen a whole lot out there, but I also think that, you know, programs that don't include a planning component to them in the long run aren't as efficient and don't inform the community as much, is my belief. And so that's how we were brought in as one, and that's how our contract works. We are under program management, but I think one of the big questions that gets out there is that, is there a conflict there? Well, if there was a conflict there, I wouldn't be closing schools. I mean, the program management team would want to manage more, right? And so, no, the idea is that we do good planning to run a good program, and we stay true to the client in that our our guidance in planning and expertise in planning can help inform not just the current SPLOST and make adaptations where needed, but to better inform early SPLOST decision making.
Tracy, stay on for a sec, because there's, and maybe Scott can answer this too, like there's a lot of questions around like what research is going into this. Where could they find the research? And you want to talk about your State of Schools report, like where all the research pieces are to this type of project.
Yeah, so you can do, I mean, I think, research and education is, and again, I can, as a former educator, because I am, that research can be kind of guided to where you believe your research should go. I think one example is grade configuration. I can show you 1,000 articles why K8 is the best grade configuration. I can show you 1,000 articles why K5, 6, 8, 9, 12 is the best grade configuration. Ultimately, good research tells us that, impacts on schools and, what those impacts on schools are most influential. We know things like number of building transitions has direct impact on student learning. We know that socioeconomics has a direct impact on learning. We know direct instruction in the classroom with qualified teaching and leadership has impact on teaching and learning. But when it comes to things like class size and school size and grade configuration and those, there's a ton of conflicting research out there. And I will tell you that. There is really good research around absenteeism and truancy, about, the higher the absenteeism, the harder it is to achieve. And so we do keep up on the research, and, we do look at that. We also look at research on, again, psychological impacts of when students are asked to be reassigned to schools. And that's why we try to look at longer term transitional periods and the support systems we need to guide that to happen. So we're aware of those, and we keep up on those. But I think that, one thing I've heard, for instance, is that, plenty of research out there shows smaller class sizes have better impact on learning. Well, what's a small class size? 10, 12, 15, where effective learning can happen at 22. Again, it's the support systems that are in place to make sure that can happen well and effectively. And so we just want to be sure that, we do pay attention to the research, but we also want to be not misinformed by the research that's out there, and understanding that sometimes big schools work and sometimes small schools have to be in place. Sometimes a grade configuration can work for one area, but not the other. And so we want to more take the research to where it's applicable, and not just give it broad brushes.
So I see a lot of comments and questions around students with special education needs, though that's not technically in this scope. Can we talk, and I believe Dr. Billingsley is on here as well, possibly talk a little bit about efforts of how students are supported with diverse learning needs, maybe in large school spaces from a curriculum end, and then I'll see if someone's here on the schools end that could talk a little bit about that. Dr. Billingsley, did you get that one?
Hi. Okay.
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Yep.
When students have diverse needs, especially, all students, but if they are in the special education program or the ESOL program, those needs are still met under the same guidelines as provided for in their IEP or TPC. So nothing changes about how the students' needs are being met if they are in the special education program. We just, as has been stated, receive more services in the building as we increase the population and demographics in that particular building. But students' needs will continue to be met according to their IEP or TPC if they have those diverse needs.
Thank you so much. I think there's also, and I love how Scott explains this, just there's a misconception that larger schools means larger class sizes. Not necessarily true. You want to talk a little bit about that, Scott? Because I think I like how you explain it.
Yeah, I continue to say this, that school size and class size are completely independent. class size is really a district level policy based decision. When we add enrollment to these facilities and we add capacity, we're also adding more adults, more teachers in these rooms or in these facilities. And so we can keep class sizes the same. We could potentially have them go down if we have more teachers per student. But I would just, I can't say this enough, that when we add on to a building, we're not just keeping the same staff and putting more students in. When we get more students, we get more teachers in the building too. It supports things like differentiated learning. You know, if you have a student that has some specific needs and you have 2 teachers at that grade level in the building and they don't mesh well with one of those 2 teachers, that could be an issue. But when you have 4 or 5 sections per grade, you have much more of an opportunity to have teachers that may be better suited to meet your students' needs.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hall, did you want to add to it? I saw your camera come on.
Yeah, just want to just kind of go back and reiterate and just remind the parent community and stakeholders that the money, the funding follows the students. And so when they are merged into an environment where they're increasing the number of enrollments or the number of students in a particular building, also please be mindful that sometimes this avails to additional resources that are now available in that particular building, because it may lead to increased enrollment in different program participations, such as the gifted program. So when those numbers increase, so does the resources that are necessary to provide the services to those students. Same thing with special education, EIP programs. So whenever there is an increase in students that are able to participate in these programs, then it avails itself to having additional resources to support those programs.
Thank you, Dr.
Absolutely.
Hall. All right, so there's a few, I want to, I guess, provide a little bit of clarity on like who's voting, who's making decisions. I see a few people saying something about a March 16th board vote. There is no March 16th board vote. Again, this is a starting point for conversation. We are collecting feedback. We will do some iterations, and at the end of March, we'll have another week-long community engagement process. Again, that will be a little more specific to cluster areas. And so there is no voting at this point for this school year. If there is possibly, maybe, I believe at the last board retreat, we heard that there may be a possible some kind of consensus on the building piece, so we can move on to boundaries and programs. That may be in play, but there is no vote required at this moment. And by the end of fall, we're hoping that the board is going to vote on the full process, is the hope. So we shall see. But again, kind of following the learning, and things are shifting kind of as we go. I also see quite a bit of questions about current capital projects on or off the list, how that connects to this work. Unfortunately, Mr. Hofstetter and Mr. Hans are at an all-day project today, but they will be in the building tonight at Cross Keys. If you have those specific questions, I will be getting those to them.
I don't mind
Scott,
taking that, Sarita.
Okay,
yeah.
Go for it.
I would just add that yes, absolutely, we have some facilities on the list that are slated for some kind of improvement projects. We just felt that in this first brush, it was very important to use a consistent application across the district. For a lot of them, kind of what brought them to the list was that cascading use. And so, this is something that is relatively new that we wanted to consider in this kind of round of planning, so that, again, we can preserve those buildings. And there are some campuses that are more impacted by cascading use than others. I'm just going to say it. It's Stoneview. Stoneview is on the list because it's very close to Lithonia Middle School. And due to cascading use, that was a facility that would convert to an elementary school that would basically fill that need for Stoneview. We didn't think that it was appropriate to really have any sacred cows in this first run around of the process. And so if you feel like, hey, we were promised something and that needs to be honored, share that feedback with us and we can work that into the next iteration. Again, this is really what planning in public is all about. we wanted to really make sure that we used a consistent application in this first round.
Thank you. I see a question. I'll answer this one about charter or magnet schools kind of in this process. So I think Scott and Tracy kind of mentioned that not every building is in this current process or this current scenario, excuse me. You will see them in the next phase. I'll let Scott talk a little bit about that. But charters in particular, we have no jurisdiction over charters. We cannot do much with them outside of the buildings that we actually own. But there's a full process to that. So we are not touching them in this process. But you want to talk, Scott, a little bit about some schools that are not and what that may look like in phase two.
Yeah, and I think we addressed that a little bit before. There's some schools that are not in that typical cluster system. I'll just mention a few: Kittredge, Wadsworth, DSA, DECA, those types of facilities, and we're looking to get those included, and possibly moving to some better facilities in that next iteration. And so again, we wanted to really make sure that the focus of this first round was just on those baseline cluster schools, and we'll be sure that we get those included along with that capital improvement overlay in that next scenario or next wave.
And we can we also just also kind of mention, and there's a few of these on here, like why this school with this adequacy score, or why this school with this capacity score. Can you talk a little bit about one, the dashboard, two, the facility, I forgot what it's called, the Excel document in there that families can get to, and I'm going to drop it in the chat just to see kind of the type of data we looked at, and to talk about like how many factors went into this, because there is not, if you will, a single factor that kind of got a school on or off that list.
Sure. If you go to the dashboard, there is a button to the far right called Facility Evaluation Metrics, and that includes things like distance to neighboring schools. And so that'll show things like, what is the average distance to the 3 closest schools at the same grade level. It will also include capacity, building adequacy score, the 2030 facility condition assessment score. We also have forecasted enrollment within 1 mile for elementary schools and 1.5 miles for middle schools and high schools, as well as forecasted utilization. Again, I can't reiterate that it's not enough that it really is not a formulaic process where we have to just consider one thing, or we give it a total average score, and that means that a school's on the list or not on the list. It's really a complex process, and there is some art to it. And so I think just a great example, and it keeps kind of coming up in the chat, was, why is it that the 3 schools or the 4 schools in the Lakeside cluster were selected to get additions and the other ones were selected to close? We're looking at trying to just increase school size at the elementary level in that area. All of the schools in there are, they're well utilized, but they're just too small. And so we kind of picked the ones that we thought had the best sites and were in the best placement to serve the students that are in those communities. So if you feel like there's a different combination or some other way that we can better serve those students, that's the kind of feedback that we're looking for in this round of the process. We want to bring you something better in the next iteration.
Let me be clear when he says they're small. The buildings are small. The enrollments are healthy. We understand that. So we want to make sure, that the buildings can accommodate the student population in a permanent capacity. And so as part of that discussion, I think, Sarita, maybe goes back to that one question where parents might not know, like they can't make a decision or give input because they don't know where their student might go. Maybe this is part of that process, is that, because some things are like, you drive the streets every day as parents and you see that. And so, we know what the bus routes are like, certainly from the transportation department. They tell us, what it means from a perspective of getting students to schools. But, we don't drive the streets every day in the streets like you do. And so being aware of things like that could be something that is maybe in our blind spot, those are things that we want to hear. Like if you want to know why we chose a site because of expansion, again, we felt like that site could be expanded on with ease, with less student disruption. And so in a construction process. And so the equal application across data was that the minimum capacity at a building, not student enrollment, capacity of building should be able to hold 600 kids. The district standard, remember, for new construction is 800. That's been in place since 2015. That is something we inherited into this process, and that's a number for new construction. But we also know that we have to have some tolerance for some variance in school size. And so we wanted to be sure that the capacity, I just want to go back to that original point. It's not that the school enrollment is too small, it's that the building can't handle the enrollment, and we want to make sure it is expanded to accommodate appropriately for students and teachers to work in.
Thank you, thank you. Stanley, I'm going to get you on camera for a second and to just talk about some of the work. I think the one that you provided, our SAP committee about transportation, routes, bus driver needs, things of that nature. And then Scott, talk a little bit about how that kind of morphed into this conversation and how we'll continue to connect with transportation as we get closer to something a little more finalized.
No problem. Thank you, Sarita, for the opportunity. Hope you guys can hear me and see me. But so our transportation department right now, we have approximately about 650 drivers, full-time drivers, I would say. We also have, at the same time, about 750 routes that we have to cover just for our elementary, high school, and middle school tiers. We're currently on a 3-tier system. Basically means that all of our drivers pick up our elementary students first. Once they drop them off, they pick up our high school students, and then they pick up our middle school students. We're also running a shuttle transportation service for our school choice programs as well. Not all, but a large number of them. And of course, we are federally mandated to transport our special needs students as well as McKinney-Vento students. And so that's the overall view of our transportation services and also some of our staffing concerns that we have right now with the amount of drivers, compared to the amount of routes that we have. So we are constantly trying to recruit and retain bus drivers for this massive operation that we have. We transport currently right now approximately 50,000 students. We're traveling about 6 million miles per school year. And whatever is happening, I stated this last night at the King meeting, we're beginning to look at possible scenarios. Until we know exactly which schools may be consolidating, it's going to be hard for us to predict right now how those routes will look. But we do know this right now, that once decisions are made for consolidation, we know that there will be more than likely more students that will need to be provided transportation. If we close school A in the community, that means some of those students in school A that may have been a walker or possible car rider may need transportation services to school B now. And so our current cost per mile right now that we spent last fiscal year was about $12 per mile to provide transportation for our students. And so again, we just don't know right now if that cost will go up or down depending on the amount of schools that we close. But it just kind of gave you an overall view. I'm not sure if that's what you were looking for, Sarita. But if you want to lead me in the direction, let me know.
Thank you. No problem. And then Scott, and I think Raymond kind of iterated to, like, once we have something a little more finalized, then we will do an assessment, right, to determine transportation impact, etc. All right. So we got, again, there's still a lot of school choice program kind of stuff that's coming, guys. We aren't quite there yet. Again, we'll see some of that information in the next round, but it'll probably take us a few rounds to get in there. What I do want to say about the school choice lottery is there is no decisions that are going to be made now or by next school year. The earliest would be fall of 2027, the 27-28 school year. If that were the case, if there are changes for that school year, we will extend the school choice lottery. In the event that, like we proposed, there were some changes and families want a little more time to get into a lottery program. So we understand that could be something we may have to shift based on how this process pans out. So I see some questions about data and assessment. I believe Dr. Roan is on the call. Questions as it relates to our buildings. Is Dr. Roan on the call? Thought I saw.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, love.
I'm here.
All right. So as it relates to buildings, what type of assessments do we have any assessments as it relates to, family satisfaction around certain physical buildings, like the type of buildings they're in? Is there anything that we collect on that currently?
There is nothing that I'm aware of that would be something that Dr. Broughton would know.
Okay.
As far as efficiency of buildings when it comes to assessments or assessment of the building.
Okay. What about
you're
specific
saying?
schools? Do we
As
collect
far
that?
as, what do you mean? I'm sorry.
Parent satisfaction with different schools, different programs throughout the
So
district.
she has the perception data as well. Dr. Broughton has that information.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
have perception data. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I hear that question. Definitely something that we can talk through. I will say, based on our initial SAP survey, it's probably now almost 2 years old. What we saw was families want choice, and families like smaller school environments. So it is not this first brush is not to say we don't already understand that, but I think as Tracy and Scott continue to iterate, like we had to do something kind of consistent across the board, and that there are some real realities the district is facing too. So we got to figure out how to come to some kind of middle ground on kind of meeting some needs that we have, but also the desire that parents have. So still, again, work in progress, and here to listen. There is some performance stuff. I feel like we've talked a bit about that. And we understand the difficulties around that. Just bear with us as we work through it. But this is very helpful information. So there's a question about expanding high schools. So there are, Scott, 3 high schools on the list. The question talks a little bit about how have we considered expanding it? Let's use Lithonia because that's the fullest high school, expanding it versus closing it and cascading.
Sure. So that's a good example. Lithonia High School, it's a well-utilized facility. The issue that we are having in that area is that all of the high schools around it are larger and newer. And so we kind of came up with our initial scenario because Miller Grove is a newer facility. It's in very close proximity to Lithonia. We could look at scenarios, and this is something that we may look at and you may see in the next iteration, where we keep Lithonia open and then we convert everything around it to a 612 facility to better utilize those seats. And so again, this is just kind of that initial set of scenarios to get feedback. There are multiple ways that we can do it, and you could look at multiple options in that next iteration.
And Tracy, can you just talk about kind of across the country, this 612 idea? Like there's some concern in the feedback. We've heard it over the week. How could we propose something where a 6th grader is in the same building as 12th grader? What are some things we've seen across the country? And then what are some things we could possibly do? Because the reality is we're opening one in Sequoia in a few years. So we have to figure it out anyhow. So what have we seen across the country?
I think it's a legitimate concern. I think the cognitive abilities, the maturity of students, and the age difference of students, we could probably make the same kind of logical leap to K-8. Having 5-year-olds in a building with a 13-year-old or an 11-year-old in a building with an 18-year-old. I think that there are districts that run. I think 712 has been a very common one across the country. Because of, and I think 712, for the reasoning of the math and sciences that are starting to push down into middle grades for advanced placement in those courses in particular, is why the sharing of resources and teachers who can teach down and up in those advanced placement courses. But I will tell you that what it does require a building that has the ability to separate students. Obviously, the social, emotional, cognitive development of students should always be one of the first things in our mind. A grade configuration is very operationally dependent on how you operate that building effectively. And so if 612 is not a comfortable grade configuration, I did a district in Georgia 2.5 years ago, and one of our first survey questions asked about grade configuration. And the community is pretty adamant that, a 612 or 712 wasn't an avenue that they wanted to explore because of those reasons. And so that was a pathway we chose. We chose to stay in a 912 environment. But I will say that once again, I kind of say this in a little bit of a joke, but not so much a joke, that, the K-8 schools, most Catholic dioceses will tell you that's the only way we're ever going to teach schools, right? But they find a way to culturally make it happen. So I understand the concerns and very aware of the concerns. I think some of the solutions school districts have tried to come up with are things like 6th grade centers or 9th grade centers, or those transitional grade level centers, which haven't proven to be very effective as single grade buildings unless they have a direct adjacency to the adjacent grade levels. So I want to be sure that we're committed to the community need when it comes to a grade configuration, and not just assuming a grade configuration can be the solution. And the other thing I've been warning against is that I'm not interested in helping create a plan that creates 10 or 12 different grade level pathways. That is confusing to parents, it's confusing to students, it causes academic teams and district level initiatives to be thwarted just because there's so many different delivery models in those. So grade configuration shouldn't be used as a capacity model fixer. Grade configuration needs to be intentional. If you want to run a K-8 building to keep middle school environments smaller because students get intimidated by larger middle school environments, understand that middle school is going to have less opportunity than a full-fledged middle school. And that's okay with some parents to have that smaller school environment. But we have to be very specific to the communities in this, and we're not just going to make a broad brush grade configuration decision because it helps fit our capacity and our student enrollment need.
Thank you so much. All right, so Raymond, I'm gonna have you jump on one more time. Because I think these are good questions. So let's just assume that maybe more kids need to be transported based on consolidations. Is more kids transported? Do you is there a process that we'll go through to determine, does that mean hopefully maybe not earlier start times? Because yes, more kids could be transported, but that doesn't necessarily equate to more routes because there are less schools that the buses are going to. Can you just explain that just so we have some clarity around what that could look like?
And I think about it in a sense of just the same way as it was explained by finance and HR, just like as we move the teachers to a facility, those drivers that are servicing that school that may be consolidated, those same drivers will be used to transport those students to the new school or the school that they'll be going to. And so again, it's hard to anticipate if the start time will increase or not. But we plan to continue to hire as much as we can and retain as much as we can. So those same drivers that are servicing a school that may be consolidated, those same drivers will pick up those said students and get them to the new school that they may be assigned to.
Great.
So we anticipate the start time being close to the same, if not the same. But again, it's hard to say that right now until we know
the full scope.
What's going to happen. Yeah.
Got it. Dr. Weaver, we got some access and opportunity and equity questions in the Q&A, both from a historical perspective, like how are we maintaining some of the historical integrity of our district, and how are there any metrics that we can add around access and opportunity as we go through this next round?
So yes, thank you for that. So as we are looking at some of the access and opportunity operations around this conversation, I think some of my colleagues have already shared so very well that when you have some of our smaller schools, our resources are stretched thin, and the resources follow the students. And so we are not able to offer as many programs or different things like that, courses, those type of things, in our smaller schools because we just don't have the demand. And so when you combine some of our smaller schools, we are able to provide stronger academic programs. We're able to strengthen some of the course offerings like our AP offerings, our advanced coursework, dual enrollment is an example. We can enhance our CTAE pathways, our world languages, music, fine arts, all of those things. I will share that I was a principal in the south end of the county for 11 years. And one of the biggest struggles that I had was being able to have enough students to offer them some of the opportunities that their peers were receiving in schools that were a little bit larger. And so as we think about this process, this is one way that we can have equitable course offerings to our students throughout the district. We also will have stronger instructional staff. Some of our staff members are itinerant in some of our smaller schools because we just don't have enough students to fill their day. And so some of our itinerant teachers are spending more time on the road traveling from school to school than in front of students. And so this process will allow us to address that. Along with supporting our SEL for our students, we can earn more counseling staff, psychologists, those type of things in our schools, and our resources. Dr. Hall talked about the resources follow the kids. And so when we have larger schools, we will have more dollars funneling into those schools that can support our students' needs. And we cannot forget that we do not have, an infinite amount of teachers. We have a finite amount of teachers. And so when you're looking at some of the hard to fill areas, special education, foreign languages, those type of things, those resources are stretched thin across our district. And this is one way that we can provide those opportunities to all of our students. As it talks about preserving the history, there are some things that we can do just from this very process. We have received some great feedback of perhaps having one school or an area within a school that preserves the history of that area. And so those are some things that we can do. We can have displays in the schools. We can have, information regarding alumni. All of those things are possible through this process. We just have to have an open mind to seeing what it can be and looking at the endless possibilities that we can use to support this effort.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna ask Tracy to jump in on this one a little bit as you've gone through these processes. There's a lot of questions on, if families don't ultimately like what comes out of this, they'll go private or they're going to leave the district. How have we accounted for that, or how have we thought about that through this process?
Well, I think that there is always risk and change to that happening. There's no question that you're going to risk some of that parents are not satisfied with that. And if they have and are able to make a choice, they will. But I also think that in the course of trying to balance a district that has 90,000 students and trying to align the facilities and align the programs the right way, I think there's going to be that inherent risk. I don't have a good answer for it. Other than that, I think that one thing that we look at, certainly in a process like this, and we've had to pay more attention to it, especially in states like Georgia and Texas and Florida, and that one thing we pay keen attention to is that strategically as we do this process, are we opening an opportunity for other competitors to come in and take our kids again? And so we've got to protect against that also.
Yeah.
And so to those of you who say, I will tell you that. Again, my experience is I just sat down with a superintendent, and admittedly, it was a smaller district, a 3 high school district in Idaho, that we went through this process where we had to close 4 schools, and that'd be equivalent of like 15 schools here. Went through a complete district reboundary process, and I sat down with the superintendent last week to see how things were going, and he said, our transportation routes are more efficient, our schools are more balanced, our class sizes are more balanced, and the district has been very quiet from a teaching and learning span. He said, well, this is the first time in 2 years that we've been able to focus on teaching and learning. And so the buildings were a distraction to them. And it took away from the core purpose of schools is teaching and learning. And we need to get the building conversation in check so we can refocus on that to make sure that we don't lose parents to other alternatives.
Yeah, so that's a nice dovetail to this question of like all families are hearing right now is closures, closures,
Yeah,
closures.
yeah.
How does this equate to better teaching and learning, better educational outcomes? We need to bridge that gap, and great segue.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, I mean, the last 5 years of the work that we've had to do on a planning side involve a lot of this. And there's nothing I want to be talking about more than, the first 20 years of this country building schools and reinvesting into programs and reinvesting in. And so, but you have to make adjustments sometime. And I think, part of it is that districts have to be willing to do this process often to kind of make alterations so it doesn't seem like all you're talking about is this. Because right now, this has become an event. It should have never been an event. It should have been a gradual process of realigning the district to adapt to the needs that are out there, but looking at a long-term vision of the district. And so I think one of the things that this process is intending to do, and one of the reasons that cascading is one approach to this, is that we need to leave some, and what I might call some building preservation in here to readjust when the district readjusts in population shifts and realigns itself, because it will. And so trying to take a longer look. Unfortunately, this cohort of students and parents that are integrated into the programs right now are dealing with something that that is kind of the focus of the conversation. We've got to get done with this building conversation and have the hard conversations to get through with it so we can refocus on the teaching and learning. And I know that's not a great answer, and it's not making you feel better in that. I understand that. But if we continue down this pathway, the only thing that'll happen is it'll get worse. And the next generation is going to have to deal with something a little worse. And the next generation is going to have to deal with something worse. And so we've got to make some alterations. Now, maybe the alterations aren't as rapid and maybe not as massive. And maybe as we get through this process, we adapt to that. And so I will guarantee you that I've never done a process in 25 years where a first round of a scenario of a total district-wide scenario has ended up being the final scenario. There's no way it can happen like that. So that's what I can tell you in that. And I wish I had a better answer for how you get to and why we have to go through a process, and this has to be a focus right now.
Thank you. I'm going to answer one more, and then I'll talk a little bit about how all the other questions will get answered in this process on our website. Scott, I'm going to have you jump in on this one as well, on just kind of how are we both like the student assignment project process along with HPM and operations working together to make sure like we're seeing all the pieces, right? Because there's some questions about, capital projects and planned construction, like how are those things being integrated into the conversation as we're also talking about this project?
We're having lots of meetings. I would say that we meet almost daily to kind of talk about all these things. I think one of the challenges in this kind of iteration of the process is that there's just so much data. And, we want to be very thorough and take everybody through every detail of the process to kind of justify every nuance of it. I don't think people want to sit through a 90 or 120-minute presentation. And so we took a lot of effort to try to distill things down to what you got on this first iteration. And I hope it's enough to kind of generate that initial amount of feedback that we can get to move forward. But we will, as we move into the next iteration, there will be more detail and there will be more clarity. I can promise you that. We will have a capital improvement overlay on this. Some of the major feedback that we got on this round was that, well, the only blue circles are in the north, and you're not doing any investment in the south. And that's just not the case. We just do not have the capital improvement overlay completed yet. And so what that will include is things like, okay, well, maybe we're going to be cascading use of this high school. Maybe it's going to be a 612. It's also going to have a modernization applied to it as well. That's that capital improvement overlay that we'll make sure that we include in that next round.
Thank you so much. And yes, we do meet a lot. So this is super helpful. We knew we would get a lot of feedback in this first round. Again, this first layer really was just like for families to really understand how we got here. We are okay with saying something was amiss. We are okay with shifting. That is really what the feedback is. So some of the feedback I've gathered already is just like, it's hard for us to give anything if we don't know kind of that next level or the next step or where my kid would go, or financially how we would even afford an addition on a school, things of that nature. Wholeheartedly understand, get it. We'll take that into consideration. As Mr. Richter said, we are kind of editing daily at this point. And as Scott said, you'll see something pretty different. Like there will be a version of what you're seeing enhanced, but there's going to be some other things as well, other scenarios that look a little bit different. So this was super helpful. On our SAP website, we are also updating that daily. We do have a feedback section on there. I believe the SAP website has been dropped a few times. There's a feedback section. So these videos, as well as the Q&A, all of the Q&A for each 4 days will be listed on there. We'll do our best to kind of answer again a little more in broad strokes. However, in this next phase, we really want to get a little more granular into each of your areas. And so we'll have to do the meetings are going to look a little different. There will be breakout sessions. There will be facilitators for those with specific questions and answers. So we're getting there. We just had to kind of get everybody to kind of a base level understanding of kind of the metrics and the tools. I believe the dashboard, school dashboard, was also dropped in there in the chat. So thank you guys very much for indulging us for a bit. And again, we have another session tonight, and then we'll be hard at work on at least starting some iterations based on what we've heard for this first week. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Weaver.
Thank you, Sarita. And again, thank each and every one of you who participated in our virtual session today. Again, your voice matters, and it will help us inform the next steps. I have to say again that what you see now is not final. No decisions have been made. And I ask that you continue to stay engaged. If you have any questions that were not answered, we ask that you go to the feedback link and make sure that you look at that information. Or if you have additional questions that come about now that you have this information, that you go there to put that information in. And so on behalf of our interim superintendent, Dr. Norman C. Sauce III, thank you so much for engaging with us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.